I had one boss once push me so far that I finally in a meeting was like, listen, do you want me to do my job or not? And he goes, it took you 18 months to stand up for me. I've been pushing you and you never said anything.
What?
And it was such a life lesson for me because while that was one of the most difficult management experiences of my life, I look back and I think he taught me a really valuable lesson, which is sometimes, even if it is the risk of getting you fired, you have to stand up for yourself. You have to set those boundaries. You have to execute. And then they'll either respect you for it or it can't get any worse than whatever it is they're doing anyways.
Welcome back to Secrets of a Corporate Game. So many people are trying to navigate a corporate world that is laden with secrets, cleverly hidden and unspoken rules to a game that most employees don't even know they're playing. On this podcast, we try to give you a peek behind the curtain and unveil some of those secrets with tips and tricks that you can apply today to start taking control of your career and progress up the ladder faster.
Hey guys, I am so excited about today's episode. We are back with Alli from corporate. And if you're not on TikTok, one, you should be, and two, you should know her. Let's all be honest. And we are going to be talking about something that I think gets brushed under the rug a lot and isn't always talked about. We're going to be talking about setting healthy boundaries and the impacts to burnout. So welcome, Alli. It is so great to have you on the show. I'm so looking forward to this.
Thank you for having me. I am so excited to be on this podcast. I love your podcast, especially your last episode. You said that you help people figure out how to play this game that we don't even know we're playing in the corporate world. And I feel like that resonates with a lot of what I do. So I'm super excited to be talking with you today.
It's going to be great. This is going to be very much a meld of the minds. So why don't you tell listeners a little bit about yourself? Because you and I had kind of a similar start in this and then in some ways very different. And so love to hear a little bit about like you, what's your professional background? How did you get into, as we were just talking, the hated influencer / coaching world? Like, what is that story like?
Yeah. So think of me as your workplace big sister. I'm not always going to sugarcoat the corporate advice, but I'm going to give it to you straight because that's how I want people to talk to me. When I started in the corporate world 12 years ago as a mechanical engineer, it was rough. I'm not going to lie. There was sexual harassment. There was being taken advantage of professionally. There was being underpaid in a bad way, everything under the sun. And I had to learn the hard way for so many things, how to take myself seriously as a professional. And at a certain point in my career, I thought I should share this with people. They don't teach this in school, you know? This is not a college course. This isn't like, I'm sure there's books out there about it, but you don't know what you don't know until you make the mistake and you look back and you go, I wish someone would have told me that. So I am here to tell you all of the things that I wish I would have known when I had started in my job, in the hopes that my knowledge empowers you and gives you a leg up in your career.
That resonates so deeply with me. And it's funny, I was talking with another coach this morning that I'm working on writing my book, which will come out in November, called Secrets of a Corporate Game. And what I talk about in the very first chapter is being thrown into corporate out of school is like playing chess, but nobody teaches you what the rules are. So you're just like moving pieces around and they're like, oh no, you can't move there. Oh no, now you lost that piece. Oh no, now you lose. And you have no idea what's going on. And so my goal is I'd rather you learn the rules and then you can figure out how you want to play rather than let's walk in blind and realize the wrong way that you can't do any of these things that you thought made perfect sense. So I love the approach that you're taking. I feel like it hits the nail on the head. And I feel like today's topic as well is so directly related to that because we assume, well, we don't. Other people assume that a company is going to have your best interest at heart and they're going to set healthy boundaries for you, and they don't. So why is it so important that we do this for ourselves?
So burnout, anxiety, depression, all of the mental health crisis that is plaguing the workforce, and especially Gen Z, which the working age for Gen Z is about 18 to 26 right now. It is so important to protect your mental health at work. Otherwise, you will feel like you're in a toxic environment and you'll leave. You will feel like you hate your coworkers. You'll feel like you don't want to get out of bed every day. Have you heard of the term the Sunday scaries? That deep sense of dread just thinking about having to work on a Monday. So people are not dreading anymore. They're starting to set firm boundaries at work. And I'm seeing that there's a way you can do it where you don't jeopardize your career. There's a way that you can do it instead where you're making enemies and creating friction in the workplace where there doesn't necessarily need to be. But yeah, I'm excited to share kind of what I've learned because it's somewhat nuanced, setting boundaries and protecting yourself like mentally in the workplace.
Yeah. I like that you are honest about the nuances with it, right? Because I would love to set a boundary where I only work 5 hours a week, but you pay me for 40 and I can just nap all day. That would be a wonderful boundary for me personally. And I think some people do take it too far, but also we have been accustomed to, for multiple generations in the past, too little of boundary setting and too much. I answer emails at 2 a.m. or I worked a job where my boss showed up at my hotel room at 2 a.m. in New York. We could have a whole separate podcast episode about that, saying like, hey, I need you to finish this report right now. Excuse me. So I love this idea of like, how do we do this in a nuanced way where our expectations are reasonable, the way we enact them doesn't get us fired necessarily, but also that we are putting ourselves first and finding that balance. And so what would you say to somebody who says their job is too hectic for boundaries? Because I do hear this a lot, especially in technical roles. You have a mechanical engineering background. Technical roles, they're always like, oh, well, I just have too much to do. I can't set boundaries. There's too much going on. Like, how do we give advice to those individuals?
So if it were me, I would ask myself, so some people thrive under pressure. Some people love being in that environment. They'll tell you they're busy. They'll tell you they're stressed, but they love it. And my best friend is like that too. She cannot sit still for too long. She feels like she's wasting her life away. She's got to be working on 10 projects at once and 2 businesses on the side and her job and her dog. So I would ask yourself first, do you love that? And be honest with yourself. Some people love it. And if you love it, have some outlets like exercise, meditation, listening to music, friends you can talk to, support networks where you can have that outlet so that you can still continue to thrive in this high stress environment. But if you are somebody else like me, who I don't work well under pressure, and if I feel like my plate is too overloaded, I need to say something so that I can continue to put my best foot forward at work. If my plate gets too much piled on with stuff, everything starts to suffer and my quality of work goes down. So first, you need to figure out which type of person you are. If you are the second type of person, you can talk to your manager and you can say something like, hey, I've been feeling super stressed lately. I want to make sure I'm doing the best job I can for you on this team. My project deserves it. What can we reprioritize so that I know exactly what to focus on and what's the most important?
It's great to take that approach, right? Because for those of you who are listening and not watching on YouTube, I raised my hand when she said, are you addicted to stress? Because that is totally me. And another coach, Masha, she and I talk about this often. I measure my worth in my productivity. If I'm not producing, I am a potato in my own brain, right? And so it is true that my boundaries look very different from somebody who doesn't thrive in a stressful, high volume type of workplace. And so I do think it's important to take that specialized route to yourself, right? What do you need personally? Everybody's boundaries should not be the same. Now, even as someone who loves a high stress environment, I do not work weekends. That is my time to be high stress on other things, right? That's my time with my kids. That's my time to record all of my content for TikTok for the next 3 months. Like, this is when I do those things that are life-giving in a different way. And so I do think it's important, even if you are a high stress person, what are your limits? Like, where do you still draw those boundaries and how do you find both? And so what are some of those ways? You gave one great example of like, hey, my plate's getting too full. My quality is going to suffer. As a result of it suffering, I'm not going to give great work. What are some other ways that people could be setting healthy boundaries? And then how do they communicate those boundaries to their leadership?
Yeah. So I'm going to take this really extreme. There are some really subtle boundaries you can set, but I'm going to give some examples that are like really in your face for things that need to be like shut down. So one of my favorite TikTokers, her name is Cami Orange. She's a boundary setting coach and she collects boundary phrases. So she has a couple that I really like, and I wrote them down. So I had a manager once who made fun of the size of my wedding ring. And he made fun of my other coworker's wedding ring. That was like, mine was too small, his was too big, or my friend's was too big. So he was making fun of us. And I knew this phrase from Cami Orange, and I said to him, "That's a really odd thing to say out loud." And he was like, "Oh," and he like got it immediately, like, "Oh, my bad," and apologized, and it did not do that again. So that is one example of, if somebody's saying something really inappropriate, it's okay to make them feel embarrassed and say like, "What an odd thing for you to say out loud." Like, so that's one example.
Snaps. Yes.
There's some weird ones out there.
Well, and I think it's true when it comes to setting boundaries and how do you like call people out on their behavior. Like early on in my career, right, you mentioned in your introduction, you've experienced some sexism in the workplace, right? Okay. I'm a young girl in financial services, ditto. And that's not to say that my coworkers were bad or that they hated me or that I was treated unfairly. Sometimes I was treated unfairly in a good way, where I got more attention because I'm the only girl on the floor. But I had a boss once, and I've referenced this on other social media content as well, say that I look like I should be dancing on the table instead of sitting at it when I was presenting to a board of financial professionals. And I look back, and I was young, fresh out of college, had no experience in the workplace. I look back on that and like, how great would it have been to say, "That's an odd thing to say out loud," and just stare at him. Like, I wish I'd had that in my repertoire to like pull out in that environment. Because you're right. I think that a lot of people just aren't thinking about it. And when you say something like that, they're like, "Oh, well, now that you say that,
Yeah.
I regret those words that just came out of my mouth."
Yep. And the biggest reason, I've had people say stuff to me like that, and in the moment I'm like so shocked that I don't say anything, but I know now to say something. Even if it makes it even more uncomfortable, you say something. And the biggest reason at the beginning of my career that I didn't stand up for myself and set these types of boundaries was because I didn't feel like I deserved to be spoken to any nicer than that, which is so weird to say out loud. But I used to have like really low self-esteem. I was a woman, R&D engineer in the medical device space. I worked for a startup. I had people talk to me awfully. And I just kind of thought like, okay, maybe that's my place in this world. But it's not true. If anybody listening to this is feeling like, yeah, people talk to me not very nicely at work, just know that you don't deserve that, and you can stand up for yourself. And it might make it a little uncomfortable, but nobody deserves to be spoken to like how you were spoken to at work, or to be made fun of in any regard. So yeah, it's a tough thing to learn, but I'm glad we're talking about it now.
Yeah, I agree. And it's great that you call that out, because I do think, especially when you're in a toxic environment for an extended period of time, which, one, if that's you, get out.
Yeah.
You can leave. I promise there are other jobs. But two, when you're there for an extended period of time, you do start to reframe the way you consider yourself, your output, your skills, based on that commentary that you're hearing frequently, right?
Yep.
And I had a client recently kind of delayed working with me, ended up working with me, told me what was going on at work, and like my jaw dropped, my eyes are huge. And I was like, "You've worked there for a year?" She's like, "I've worked there for 7." I was like, "Oh, no, you have to leave." Like, and it was so egregious that everyone on the call is like, "Oh my God, is that really happening?" But you get conditioned in those environments where you start to think, well, like maybe I do deserve to be talked that way, or maybe my output's not that great, or maybe I don't know what I'm doing. And like, it is important to be able to identify what is an external conditioning of you versus like, how do you really feel about yourself, right? And so I love that. And you talk about like power dynamics too when it comes to setting boundaries, right? Because there is something to play, right? I was an entry-level analyst, and the person who said that to me was a senior VP. Like, how do power dynamics play into this, and how do you approach them depending on the situation?
Wow. Yeah, like if somebody had said that to you and they were a technician on the manufacturing line, would you have set a boundary any differently than that executive? I think no. I think everybody should be treated with respect, and the janitor should be treated with as much respect as the CEO and everybody in between. And I think there should be not a whole lot of difference with boundary setting when you take power dynamics into account. But that goes to say that when we set a boundary, we don't need to be rude. We just need to be straightforward and have an example in mind. If somebody's like, well, can you give me an example? So like, be clear. Don't set a general boundary, like have something really clear and concise. But I think that power dynamics don't really play a role in boundary setting, unfortunately. Maybe they should. What do you think? Should they?
I think what you're saying is fair, right? It wouldn't matter to me if it was a peer or a senior VP who said that to me. It's not appropriate, right? Like in the end, the standard should be the same. Now, I think maybe the way you communicate setting that boundary differs a little, right? Like with a peer, like, John, does that make sense? What you just said out loud, why would you say that? Like if I have a good relationship with them and they're my level, like I'm probably going to approach that much more casually versus an executive. You know, do you say something to them directly? Do you say something to HR? Do you say something to your boss and let your boss escalate and handle it on your behalf, right? I think some of those things are interesting because as a millennial people leader, if somebody talked like that to my team, smackdown. HR would be waiting in their office. I would be waiting in their office. My boss would be waiting in their office. Like I have a no holds barred. You go after my people, we're done, right? But when I was more junior, I don't know that I would have had the confidence to go up to him and say, I can't believe you said that to me in a meeting, right? So some of this is like, do you have people in your corner, right? What does your network look like? What does your professional support system look like? Because in that situation, and I love that we have this tactical example we're going to use for most of today's episode. I dotted lined to a female VP who, by the time I made it to my desk, somebody in that meeting had texted her, given her a heads up, and she was waiting for me with HR and my peer who had been in the meeting before I even sat down. Like, all right, would you like to file a complaint? What's the process? Do you want me to yell at him? Like, do you want a new job? Do you want to change structure? Like, how can we help? Like before I was even able to sit. And that is because I had a strong professional network at the time who kind of jumped in to be like, she's not in a position to handle this herself. We need to help her. But a lot of people don't have that, right? So what they do is they quit, would be my estimation. Something like that would happen and you'd be like, all right, well, that was fun.
Yeah, you're right. So I do have an example of a boundary that I've set with somebody who did something inappropriate, who was a way higher level than me. So I was a lowly engineer, we'll call it, and he was a senior director of manufacturing. I had just started on a project. I was the project lead. I had told the team, all right, here's the plan. Let's go execute. This man was a newly hired senior director. He came in and emailed the group a different plan. And he said, all right, team, we're going to do this, this, and this. And I was so upset that night. And I told my husband, like, what do I do? And my husband said, you need to email him right now and say, that's not the plan I came up with. You gave me authority here. And you need to empower me and give me the credibility with the team so that there's one cook in the kitchen. And I told him this man could get me fired. I don't know if I should say that. And he said, just do it. So love my husband. He's always trying to help me be like a little more, like feel empowered. So I emailed him and the guy said, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I did not realize that you had already sent a plan. I'm so sorry. And he sent an email back to the entire group saying, disregard my email. Please listen. Please follow Allison's lead. So, but I was so nervous. I was nervous to do it. I almost didn't say anything, but that man approached me about a year later and sent me a message after I was not working at the company anymore. And he said, I just want to let you know I have so much respect for you. He didn't mention our like the thing that happened, but he's like, I just want to let you know that I have a lot of respect for you and what you're doing. And I thought that he would have hated me because of the boundary that I set, but instead he had more respect for me.
I think that's awesome. And it's so funny because I don't know if this is a difference between men and women. I don't know if this is a difference based on industry or seniority, but I feel like you felt like, oh my gosh, you're going to send that? Right? Like my natural knee-jerk reaction is like, can a director handle that blow to their ego? Right? Is that going to be make or break? And I've worked with other leaders who I had one boss once push me so far that I finally in a meeting was like, listen, do you want me to do my job or not? And he goes, it took you 18 months to stand up for me. I've been pushing you and you never said anything.
What?
And it was such a life lesson for me because while that was one of the most difficult management experiences of my life, I look back and I think he taught me a really valuable lesson, which is sometimes, even if it is the risk of getting you fired, you have to stand up for yourself. You have to set those boundaries. You have to execute. And then they'll either respect you for it or it can't get any worse than whatever it is they're doing anyways. Right. And so I love that you have this example of like, hey, I reached out, I stood my ground, and you backed it up with, do you want me to have authority here? Do you want me to be able to execute this on your behalf? Then you have to let me. And that he responded positively to that. I think that's such a win.
Yeah, it felt good. I was so nervous in the moment. I was shaking. My heart was racing. I sent it. I'm like, should I start job searching now or like tomorrow?
Or tomorrow.
But it went well. But sometimes it might not always go like that. Sometimes the person, you might embarrass them and they might hate you forever, but at least you stood up for yourself.
I think that's true. Better to have stood up for yourself and for it to blow up and you leave than to not stand up for yourself and you just suffer silently for whatever given period of time.
Yep. And so I love talking about personal branding. We don't have to completely switch topics, but this will eventually help your personal brand over time because people will see you as a well-respected person and somebody who doesn't take crap from anybody. And people will see that you're setting these boundaries in meetings and they'll go, yeah, Allison, she doesn't put up with anything. She's like straight shooter. And it'll become part of your personal brand that nobody can screw with you, which is a very powerful element of a personal brand.
Yeah. There's also the flip side, since we are on personal brand, which is one of my personally favorite topics, is when you do think of that assertive brand, one of the things I often encourage my clients to do, I'd be interested to get your perspective on this, is you also have to have the personal relationship piece, right? Because it's one thing to be, hey, nobody messes with Allison. She gets her stuff done. She's on top of it. She, is direct, takes no BS. There's a very fine line between that and nobody likes to work with Allison. She's difficult. She doesn't communicate well. She's too aggressive, right? We hear that a lot. She's too aggressive, doesn't smile enough. Okay, I'm just kidding about the last one. But like, you have to have that personal relationship piece to support that so that, hey, I can be assertive and action-oriented and driven in my work and still be a good person who you like and you want to continue working with, who you know has your best interest at heart, has your back. So I'd be curious to hear your take on that too, when it comes to like balancing the respect with the people side. And if you're like, nah, screw it, I'd rather be known as aggressive, or if you think, hey, we've got to build both.
No, it's funny that you're saying that because I recently had a conversation with a business advisor of mine who I trust a lot. And they gave me some feedback that like exactly what you're saying, that I am taking this to heart and I really am wanting to work on this. I could be a little more tactful in my delivery. I could be a little more gentle with my communication, and a couple other things like along the lines of what you just mentioned. So keep in mind that the advice I'm giving right now is coming from a place of I'm one extreme and I'm working on getting a balance of like being more charismatic in my communication and not being just the person who's aggressive, but like being somebody who stands up for themselves, but also can be kind and gentle at the same time. But that is hard for me, I'll admit.
It's self-awareness and it grows over time too, right? Because I tell every client who ever wants to work with me, what year is it? 9 years ago, almost 10 years ago now. Yeah, I'm trying to do math in my head and talk at the same time. About 10 years ago, I had a very similar approach as to what you're describing, right? That's not going to work. You're wasting everybody's time. Let's focus on getting results. We have deadlines to meet, and I had a reputation for Kendall Get Stuff Done. And I'll never forget, I had an executive that I worked with, and I had a ton of respect for him. He and I worked together on a lot of projects, whip smart, good dude. And he wrote in my year-end review, everybody likes working with Kendall because she gets stuff done, but nobody likes working with Kendall.
That's eye-opening.
And I had never received that feedback in my whole career because I was the person who got stuff done. And so managers overlooked some of the communication pieces for the fact that I could get a ton done in a really short time period with lots of constraints and lots of, limited resources. And I scheduled one-on-one time with him and I was like, hey, I am so thankful for your feedback. What? Like, what does that mean? Like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And he was like, Kendall, you don't listen to anybody. You don't take feedback well. You just get stuff done. He goes, and there's a place for that, but at some point you're going to hit a ceiling. And it was such an eye-opening experience for me because similar to you, I wanted that to be part of my brand. I valued that people didn't push me around and that they respected my opinion. And it's learning that balance of like, okay, you have to be that, you do, but you also have to be the person people want to talk to. They want to open up to. They feel comfortable going to with new ideas. And so finding that balance, it is an art and not a science, right? And it's great to hear that you're on that journey too, because it's hard.
It's hard. It's uncomfortable. It's hard. You have to take a good hard look in the mirror, which is difficult sometimes, to take accountability for the things that you could be doing better. And then knowing how to work on them, practicing it, putting it into action. Like, that's where I'm at. And luckily, like, my husband, I talked to him about it and he's like, I'll help you. I'll support you. Like, let me know if you need reminders or if you want any feedback. But like, I love that for you. So if you're going to work on something like that in your life, anybody who's listening or watching, like, make sure you have somebody who can share active feedback with you. Like, yep, you're going in the right direction. Good job. Or like, no, that's not quite it. Let's keep working, but
yeah,
it is hard.
And, shout outs to supportive husbands and supportive wives, supportive partners, spouses, whatever we want to call them. It makes such a difference too, to have somebody that you can go to and be like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I know I need to do this. What does this look like? I don't know. Help me. Right. And, you're an entrepreneur. You're building a very successful business. Congratulations.
Thank you.
If you're anything like me, I talk to my husband all the time. I'm like, dude, I have no idea what I'm doing in my life.
Same.
I'm like, is this right? Does this sound right to you? Like, can I get a temp check? Yeah, no, are we headed in the right direction? Right. And you need that, whether you're in corporate, you're an entrepreneur, you're, starting a new business, you're established in your business, like, you need that support system. So if you're listening to this and you're like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I also have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just doing it.
I'm fumbling around in the dark, seeing what sticks. And
yes.
But I'm also doing it out loud on social media, which is really weird because millions of people see sometimes, which is freaky, but like.
Well, there's a female public speaker I really love, and she says the difference between people who are successful and people who are not successful is the people who are successful did something. Whether it was right, wrong, or otherwise, they did something. And it is great to have all these ideas and all these thoughts. And if we're applying this to your corporate job, it's great to think about setting boundaries. It's great to think about your personal brand. It's great to think about new project ideas. But if you don't do anything with it, if you don't say anything, if you don't stand up for yourself, if you don't advocate for yourself, you're not going to be successful because those ideas don't have the opportunity to turn into something positive or negative.
Yep. You're absolutely right. Yeah. And it's scary sometimes, but I tell people like, if you're going to have a goal and set your mind to something and it makes you scared, just do it scared. Like, put yourself out there. Yeah.
My first video ever on social media got 4.1 million views, right? We're talking like overnight success. And it was 70% hate comments. Okay. So this is the first video, not the first video I'd ever posted as an individual, but like in my corporate career coaching account, the first video I ever made, 4.1 million views, 70% hate comments. It was very exciting because I was actually out of town and my phone was like ding, 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 ding. And I was like, what is happening? And in a lot of ways, I think a lot of people could have been really frustrated by that. Like, hey, I shared what I thought was really good advice. Half the people hate it. And all I could see was 4.1 million views, baby. We're going to turn this into a business. This is great, right? And so I think sometimes even that failure, even that, hey, it didn't go the way I expected, even that, setback, it's a step forward. And you got to keep rolling with that in corporate and in life, right?
Yep.
Which I'll have to send you that video after and get your take. But it was a whole...
I'm gonna look for it.
And it was so funny. But anywho, but if we think about all of this is coming back to how do you find success at work? How do you set good boundaries? How do you set yourself up to be the type of person you want to be and to be respected the way that you want to be? And I know that you mentioned there's a lot of impacts on mental health, on depression, on anxiety. And I'd love to hear, some of the stats and some of the ways that you think that's manifesting in the corporate world as well.
Yeah. So I'm glad you're asking about this. I have an article open right now. So Gallup recently did a study in September of 2023. They found that only 47% of Gen Zers are thriving at work currently. And to compare that with millennials, 60% of millennials in the same size group said that they were thriving. So less people are thriving now in their jobs. But there's an element of optimism that I think is very interesting. So this article says that members of Gen Z are more likely to report negative emotions such as stress, burnout, anxiety, loneliness, depression. Only 15% of them describe their mental health as excellent, which is very low. But the good part about this is the study said that there's an enduring optimism in the face of mental health because 3/4 of Gen Z say they felt they have a bright future ahead. Okay, so what does this all mean? I think Gen Z, again, we're talking I think it's ages 11 to 26, but if they're at working age, it's 18 to 26.
They're 26. Okay, sorry. Gen Z is not old. 26. How old am I? Okay, sorry, continue.
So if we think about what this means, I think Gen Z, I really commend the Gen Z generation. They are really the first generation that's standing up for their mental health at work and setting these firm boundaries. And even though they are struggling through it, from what these results are saying of the study, they are optimistic that what they're doing will work and they will come out of this ahead. So yeah, interesting stats out there.
Well, and I think there is a shift in the workplace for do we care about mental health, right? That's a very blunt way of saying it. But I can tell you my first job, if I'd gone to my boss and said I was stressed and needed an afternoon off, he'd have laughed in my face and been like, that's cute. No. Right. And he was a great boss. I'm not dissing my first boss, but it just wasn't as common practice, I feel, as it is now to talk about these types of things and to give those mental breathers to make sure that people are able to operate optimally and be able to show up well. And I think, it is a positive track for us. I think it's difficult for companies to manage because there are also bad actors.
Yeah.
Right. And so how do you find the balance there? But I'd love to hear, with all of this being said, Gen Z is coming in, they're in the workforce. They are much stronger with their boundaries than my generation ever was, for sure. They're willing to drop a job at the drop of a hat because they're like, I don't know. Sally made eye contact with me in a meeting and I didn't like it. So I'm out. This has been real, right? But I'm curious, when you think of this and how this is going to show up in boundaries at work, both for the employee and how companies respond to it, what do you think you see in the future? What could that look like for managers and employees now?
So I want to make sure I understand your question. When people are starting to set boundaries, what is this going to look like at work? How our workplace is going to evolve?
Yep. So
have you ever taken a personal day or a mental health day as a sick day?
No.
Did you know that counts as a sick day? I believe.
I'm sure I knew that I could do that, but I don't know that I ever have.
So I didn't know that until recently, that you can take a sick day and say, I'm taking a personal day. You don't have to be coughing, sneezing, runny nose in bed, unable to move. You can just be I'm not feeling it right now. I need some space. Companies don't advertise that. Obviously, why would they? People might take advantage, but a lot of companies offer things like yoga on Thursdays or free subscription to Calm or Headspace, which are great like meditation, mental health apps. But there's also some studies out there that say companies are really trying, but companies think they're doing better than they're doing. And
I would believe that.
I would believe that. But people are saying, like, we see that you're trying, but it's not working, and you think it's working, but it's not. So I love that companies do these surveys. Have you ever been a part of like a big company survey where they're like, okay, spend 10 minutes answering these questions honestly. It's anonymous, which I don't know if it's really anonymous or not.
Depends on the size of the organization, if it's anonymous or not. But yes, I'm with you.
But I always try to be like pretty honest in those, because then you get to see the statistics afterwards of, okay, 70% of you are feeling this way. We're going to create an action plan and present it to you in a month from now for how we can remedy this. I worked at a company that did that. I had so much respect for them, and they actually worked on fixing their culture. They actually did. There are also companies that say, these things are important to us. DEI is very important to us, but they don't walk the walk. And so I think it's really clear to employees when companies say they're prioritizing something, but they're not really. And then the opposite, when they say, yep, this is important, and they really are. So yeah.
There's two things you touched on that I want to circle back to. So one, the last thing that you mentioned of like companies who like talk the talk but don't walk the walk. So I always joke, like if I was going to write a book, though I am writing a book and this is not what it's about. So maybe my second book, I would write a whole book on what I call ghost cultures. Ghost culture is what the CEO thinks it is. It's what the head of HR thinks it is. It's what's in your pamphlet. It's what you receive in your welcome package. And you will never, ever, ever see that culture a day that you work for that company. What you experience every day is the subculture of your team and your direct leadership. And that's what everybody faces. And so to your point, I think as Gen Zs and millennials get higher up in the workforce and they have more influence over their leadership organizations, I think you're going to see more responsiveness to, hey, I do care about your mental health. I do care that you need a day off. I have an employee that last week was like, hey, it's been a long week. It's Friday. I'm not feeling it. I don't have any big meetings. And I was like, cool, bye. See you Monday, right? I don't care. So I think you are going to start to see more of that as the subcultures get higher and cover more of companies, right? Now you'll still have bad eggs, but for the most part, like that's kind of the trajectory that like I personally hope to see, at least as we kind of expand. And the second thing that you touched on with like companies think they're doing better than they are. This always makes me think of those like pizza party memes. That's like, your team did great, pizza party in the lounge. And it's like the CEO, the cheesy smile. Now don't get me wrong, I'll eat the pizza. Like I'm not so high and mighty that I'm going to walk past the cafeteria and not eat the pizza. I'm going to stop and get a slice. But that does not make me feel appreciated or valued or special or like you care or that you listened to my engagement survey results and made a plan to resolve it, right? Which is actually something that I run for my corporate job is I run the employee engagement survey responses, even though I run a strategy team in tech, which has absolutely nothing to do. I'm so passionate about employee engagement that I was like, I'll just take that. Thank you so much. If that could just come over into my space, that would be swell. Because it is important, and I do think it matters. And so I totally believe we could find the statistic, and we'll try and cite it in the show notes. But I totally believe that companies think like we are fabulous. It's like a manager who thinks they're great, and then their survey results are always like bottom 10th percentile. So yeah, I just think there's not a lot of that self-awareness. So we've covered so many good topics today. How do you set boundaries? What are some ways you can do it? What are the effects on mental health? We've talked Gen Z, branding. I feel like we've like covered the globe, which has been so awesome. But if you had to share like one parting message for our listeners, like, hey, tomorrow at work, I want you to go do this, or hey, here's something that I think will really help you change your life, your trajectory, your career. What would that be? And like, let's give our listeners one last chance to start finding some success.
I would say, okay, one piece of advice is that if you are currently unhappy in your work situation, look around you. Is it something that you can change? If not, get help. or leave, or if you're scared to leave, hire a coach. Like you and I know a bunch of good career coaches. I know you have clients. I have clients, but you deserve to love what you do. Life is short. Like,
Yeah.
if it's not working, you can leave. If you can't change it, leave. And you deserve to love what you do. And if you don't, you can change it.
That's awesome advice. Everybody listening, I hope you tuned in for like the last minute of this episode, if for no other reason than that, and that you all wake up tomorrow with a renewed sense of hope in your career. So, Alli, it has been so incredible having you on the podcast. I've loved our conversations. I feel like we very much have similar energies. Where can people find you if they want to know more, if they want to connect with you, if they want to work with you? What are all the places they can find you?
I am everywhere. I am everything everywhere all at once. So I am most present on Instagram these days. So yeah, hit me up on Instagram. I'm at Alli from Corporate Zero, and LinkedIn is a good place also. I post daily tips and resources on LinkedIn for how to thrive in the workplace, how to set boundaries, how to survive office life. So I'd say Instagram and LinkedIn.
Awesome. Yeah. And we will link those below the episode so that you guys can go find Alli and you can check out all of her amazing advice, all of her realism and her direct feedback on the corporate world, because Lord knows we need more of that these days. Also, if you like today's episode, make sure you hit the subscribe button, make sure you follow, make sure you rate us 5 stars, and check out some of our other episodes with our amazing guests. But Alli, it was awesome having you on the show. We'll have to have you back in the future, and we appreciate you being here today.
Thank you. This was awesome.